Class number 6, Acoustic Beats. Beats. Few concepts are simpler than beats. Yet, it not only explains a lot about sound and music, but it transcends to radio, radar, and signal processing. Let us begin with how do we humans perceive acoustic beats. Our brain is good at patterns. It can feel that a sound has a periodic spectrum without even thinking about it. For instance, it will find this sound periodic, while this other one, after some subconscious frustration, it won't be able to find a periodic pattern in the spectrum. But periodicity becomes a sensation only when the frequency is above 20 Hz, which is the lower threshold of the standardized hearing range. Pitch is the word for the sensation of frequency, and no pitch is felt when it's below 20 Hz. When there's a sequence of sound envelopes that have periodic spectra, like those coming from standing waves and strings or pipes, then you have a tune. Even when the sounds in a sequence are not periodic spectrum-wise, like those coming from drums or bells, our brain can learn to find the pattern in a sequence of envelopes that is known as a rhythm. And once it can anticipate what's coming, it would also find it enjoyable. If allowed this to go on, your brain will start moving your body to that rhythm, and pretty soon you will be doing the conga. What if you add a tune to that rhythm? Feels good. Well, it's time to get down to business. Let's learn about acoustic beats. Say we have two pure sources of sound, one of 110 Hz and another of 104 Hz. Let's play them both. These pulses of sound interference are called acoustic beats. Being their frequency of 6 Hz, we don't feel a pitch, but we feel the rhythm. Certainly not as pleasant as the conga, but a rhythmic pattern anyway. For those of you that just need the math, from good old trigonometry.
Trigonometry? Who remembers? That's high school stuff.
I'm trying hard to come up with something that doesn't involve some sort of insult, but I don't seem to find one, so let's move on. From good old trigonometry, we know this identity that shows how the sum of the sines can be expressed as the product of the sine of the semi-sum by the cosine of the semi-difference. Say that we replace A with 2 pi f1 and B by 2 pi f2, then we have this expression that graphically can be stated like this. What if you don't allow the sound sources to add in the air, but feed the two sounds separately to each ear using headphones? Guess what? Amazing. You still hear the beats. These beats are called binaural, and here's Dr. Wikipedia for a short explanation.
Binaural beat perception originates in the inferior colliculus of the midbrain in the superior olivary complex of the brainstem, where auditory signals from each ear are integrated and precipitate electrical impulses along neural pathways through the reticular formation of the midbrain to the thalamus, auditory cortex, and other cortical regions.
What? Why the blank faces? Is that you couldn't follow such a simple explanation? Shame on you. While interface beats have been known for centuries, the binaural are quite recent. That is because electronic generation of pure sine signals and headphones are very much 20th century. Binaural beat therapy is now available, and some claim to be effective for reducing stress and anxiety. These beats turn interesting when their frequency enters the hearing range. The bits begin to be perceived as a third sound source, with a frequency that equals the difference of the two that really exists. Say there's a violin playing an A5, 880 Hz, and another is playing a third above C sharp, 1109 Hz. An annoying off-key sound between A3 and A3 sharp of 229 Hz may be heard. Still, no one's playing it. This is combination tone, also called a Tartini tone, after Giuseppe Tartini, a baroque composer that was the first to identify and explain the effect. An example would be in order. However, there's no guarantee that it can be heard with every sound system or by every untrained ear. Here's the first example. Here's a second example. There are two main explanations for this effect. One comes from Hermann von Helmholtz in 1863. It says that since the ear response to sound intensity is nonlinear, the amplitude modulation on a stimulus can render the resulting sound in its response.
And why would it be nonlinear?
You can hear a whisper and also listen to a rock concert. The amplitude of the stimulus in this last one is 1,000,000 times that of the whisper, but your sensation doesn't go in that proportion, for it cannot be 1,000,000 times stronger. Hence, it must be nonlinear. Here we are showing the acoustic pressure of some typical sound levels in pascals. 1 pascal is 1 Newton per square meter. The atmospheric pressure is 100,000 pascals. And here's the acoustic power in watts per square meter of those same typical sound levels. The hearing sensation seems to go with the exponent of the acoustic power. This seems to be a good time to introduce the unit for sound intensity. The decibel, or dB for short. Same as the deciliter or decimeter, that is 1/10 of a liter and a meter respectively. The decibel is 1/10 of a bell. However, the decibel is the unit used for it's the smallest sound increment that can be perceived by humans. If the power of sound is 10 times that of a human threshold, it's said to be 1 bell. If it's 100 times that, then it's 2 bells. If 1,000, then 3 bells, and so on. It goes with the exponent of 10, or in other words, the logarithm of the power ratio. That's why the bell is said to be a logarithm unit.
How big are those bells? What an idiot! Bell is the name of the French lady that invented the unit.
Oh my God, Sebastian, stop it. You're not even close. The unit is called the bell after Alexander Graham Bell. However, he didn't invent the unit, but he did invent the telephone. And in 1877, he founded the company in the labs of which the unit was created. That company's still around. Maybe you've heard this company being mentioned. AT&T? Here are the sound levels expressed in decibels. Coming back to the combination tones, the nonlinear effect only produces one when the sound is intense, like the case of Tartini and his violins. But it cannot explain the case of the missing fundamental.
Why not?
Because it also happens at low intensity, where every response is almost linear. There's another explanation that solves the case, but I'm afraid it comes in Dr. Wikipedia style. It basically says that the brain finds periodic patterns even in beat modulations, and so it feels the pitch even when there are no spectral components with those frequencies. Consider this waveform. It is composed by 6 harmonics. It sounds like this. Notice that the period of the waveform is the same as that of the fundamental. What do you think will happen if we remove the fundamental?
The second harmonics becomes the fundamental.
So, being the fundamental what determines the pitch, then it must feel higher now, right?
That's right, but his idiotic logic went no further than the second harmonic had to be the second in command.
Well, okay, but let's listen to it. Here's the fundamental again. Here's without. Here's with. And here's without.
Wow, it's the same pitch, but just a different timbre.
Sebastian, what happened to your superior logic? Even when you remove the fundamental or any other harmonic, the period of the waveform, which is the sum of all of them, will remain the same, hence the same pitch sensation. Here's the waveform when the fundamental is removed. Notice that it has the same period of the waveform with the fundamental. You may also look at it this way. The combination tone of any 2 consecutive harmonics will have the same frequency of the fundamental. Got it?
Not just the same pitch. Never heard the difference.
That's because the small speaker in your phone cannot play the 110 Hz of the fundamental, and the sound you're hearing might also be missing the second harmonic and even a big chunk of the third. What would be surprising is that you will feel the removal of what was never there. This also explains why you can listen to music out of the small speaker of your phone. Watch this video clip with the sound you will hear if reproduced by headphones or a good speaker system. Also notice the frequency of the notes the left hand is playing. But when you're put on hold and get the playback through the phone speaker, this is what you may hear. It may not be a wonderful music experience, but anyone can recognize the tune even though most of the sound from the left hand of the piano is missing. Here's another mystery, the hi-fi equipment. These pricey pieces of equipment offer sound reproduction in a range that's usually beyond human hearing. Human hearing range is normally considered to be from 20 Hz to 20 kHz. However, someone beyond his 40s can hardly hear anything over 13 kHz. Then, are these hi-fi monsters designed for kids and teenagers that cannot afford them? Though human stupidity is one of the two things Einstein listed as being infinite, this is not an example. Say there are two violins. One is playing a C7 at 2093 Hz and the other one an E7 at 2637 Hz. Nothing uncommon, that's a major third in musicians' jargon. Someone beyond his 40s would be hearing maybe the first 6 harmonics of the first violin and the first 5 or 6 of the second. However, the combination tone of the 7th harmonics of the first violin at 14.651 kHz with the 6th of the second violin at 12.822 kHz may be heard loud and clear at 1.171 kHz. Listen. Let's play the 7th harmonic of the first violin. Heard something? I didn't. Now let's do the 6th harmonic of the second violin. That one I could hear very faintly. Let's hear them both now. That I heard loud and clear. The same will happen with the rest of the combination tones of all the harmonics above the hearing threshold of the listener. That is why the sound system that can deliver sounds beyond the hearing range threshold will sound different than the one that cannot. It has already been established that for someone that's no longer in his teens or early 20s, sounds over 13 to 15 kHz are beyond his or her hearing range. We will alternate full and filtered range so that the difference can be noticed. Emotions seem to relate not only to the periodicity of a pattern, but to how many periodicities our brain can find in the sound spectrum. The fullest and periodic the spectrum, the more intense the emotion. Here's a sequence of perfectly periodic sounds, a simple tune played by the simplest instrument. We'll finish today's lesson with the same tune, but this one is gonna give me the goosebumps. it's that time. Time for the quiz. The answers can be found after the end of the video. Say if it's true or false. Tunes are patterns of sound envelopes with periodic spectra. Rhythmic patterns go straight to emotion without even thinking about it. Bits happen when periodic sounds, not necessarily sinusoidal, interfere. Binaural bit therapy has been around since the Renaissance. Tartini tones are real spectral components that create when two instruments are playing too close to each other. Combination tones can only be explained by the nonlinearity of the human ear. A 60 dB normal conversation has 40 times the power of a 20 dB whisper. The pitch of a 110 Hz sound out of a cello is still 110 even if it loses the fundamental. But not if it also loses the second and the third harmonic. If you cannot hear the tones over 13 kHz, you cannot tell if the audio is being reproduced beyond that. Music sensation is greater the fuller the spectrum is with intense periodic sounds. Problem number 2. Say one flute is playing at A4, that's 440 Hz, and another one is playing at E5, 660. This is called a perfect fifth. It feels fuller and more enjoyable. Combination tones are generated that are not in the spectra of any of the two flutes. Listen. Again. Can you find the frequencies of the first 5? Problem number 3. Below, we are showing the spectrum of the concert. The maximum register power for every music interval is displayed. The area in dark green is for the loudest passage, and that in light green is for the quietest one. Even if you had the hi-fi equipment capable of delivering the necessary power, you probably want to avoid a police raid. Yeah, that one. So you better bring down that power when playing back its recording in your living room. There. But in doing that, you will be missing passages. The curve in red is the human hearing threshold. The one in light blue is the police raid threshold. You want your music to be within those two, so you need to use the equalizer. Here's how the equalizer works. Got it? Set the equalizer to bring as much of the concert music as possible within the red and blue limits. Problem number 4. This guitarist is playing the same tune twice, but one at half the frequency of the other. Using high-pass filter, we removed that part of the spectrum. Yet, you can still hear the lower tune. Explain why. Finally, problem number 5. When a pure tone of 110 Hz combined with another one of 104, we heard beats with 6 Hz. Yet, according to the math, the modulation was the cosine of 2 pi by the semi-difference, which is a sinusoid of only 3 Hz. Can you explain this?
Easy. 3 bits go into one ear, 3 into the other, and the brain adds them up. But having only half a brain, he hears only 3 bits.
Oh, Stop it, we had enough for one video. In this class we learned that all that we hear is not necessarily there, and that the more we hear and can anticipate, the greater the enjoyment and the stronger the emotion. But there's more to come. And in the next, we'll talk about music scales, chords, and the elusive concepts of consonance and dissonance. Subscribe to the channel. Only after you have answers of your own is that you can take a peek at mine. Here they are. Well, here if it is true or false. Tunes a pattern of sound envelopes with periodic spectra. That's absolutely right. Rhythmic patterns go straight to emotions without even thinking about it. Rhythmic patterns must be learned. Enjoyment requires anticipation. The more sophisticated the rhythm, or the tune, the longer the learning curve, but it is rewarded with a greater enjoyment. So, bits happen when periodic sounds, not necessarily sinusoidal, interfere. That's correct. Binaural beat therapy has been around since the Renaissance. Binaural therapy helped Galileo with the stress of his Inquisition trial.
Really?
Sure, it was Leonardo that painted him during one of his therapy sessions. Come on. Tartini tones are overtones happening when two instruments are playing too close to each other. Tartini tones have nothing to do with how near to each other musicians can sit. What is important is that their fundamentals are strong and their frequency difference is in the audible range. Combination tones can only be explained by the nonlinearity of the human ear. Fortunately, it's not the only explanation. If so, there will not be one for the existence of combination tones at lower sound intensities, like those that allow hearing bass notes with small speakers. When the stimulus is small, any response is linear. A 60 dB normal conversation has 40 times the power of a 20 dB whisper. A 60 dB normal conversation has 1,000,000 times the power of a human hearing threshold, while a whisper has only 100 times that. So, normal conversation is not 40 times the power of a whisper, but 10,000 times. The pitch of a 110 Hz sound out of a cello is still 110 even if it loses the fundamental. The period of the waveform will be 110 Hz even if the fundamental is not present. You can also look at it this way. All the combination tones of successive harmonics will be 110 Hz. So we'll stay hearing the same pitch. That is correct. But not if it also loses the second and the third harmonic. That would be true if the sound of the cello had only 4 harmonics. But since it has many more than we would bother to count, the statement is false. However, if the harmonics keep disappearing, the power may eventually go so weak that the pitch sensation could eventually disappear. If you cannot hear tones over 13 kHz, you cannot tell if an audio is being reproduced beyond that. You may not hear a pure tone of 14 kHz, but the combination tone with another of say 15 kHz may produce a loud and clear pitch corresponding to 1 kHz. So anyone can easily tell the difference. Music sensation is greater the fuller the expression is with intense periodic sounds. This is as true as a statement can be. Just listen to Wagner for a few seconds. Problem number 2. Say one flute is playing at A4, 440 Hz, and another one is playing an E5, 660. Combination tones are generated that are not in the spectra of any of the two flutes. Can you find the frequency of the first 5? Say the harmonic frequencies of the first flute are FA4 sub M equal M multiplied by 440, where M is 1, 2, 3, and so on. The harmonic frequencies of the second flute are FE5 sub N, where N is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, multiplied by 660. Frequencies of the combination tones are then F sub C equal the absolute value of the product of N440 minus N660, or FC equal 200K, where K is the absolute value of 2M minus 3N, which is also 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. If K is not a multiple of 2 or 3, then FC will not be a multiple of 440 or 660. The first 5 are 220, 1100, 1540, 2450, 2860, corresponding to K equal 1, 5, 7, 11, and 13. That's the answer. That in table form. Set the equalizer to bring as much of the concert music as possible within the red and blue limits. The longest question has the shortest answer. That is it. This guitarist is playing the same tune twice, but one at half the frequency of the other. Using the high-pass filter, we have removed that part of the spectrum. Yet, you can still hear the lower tune. Explain why.
Wasn't that the same that happened with the small speakers that could not reproduce bass?
Yeah, and you can still hear those low-pitched tones. The combination tones of the non-filter harmonics produce pitch sensations with beat frequency that line the range that had been filtered out. That's the answer. Problem number 5, finally. When a pure tone of 110 Hz combined with another one of 104, we heard bits with 6 Hz. Yet according to the math, the modulation was the cosine of 2 pi by the semi-difference of f1 of f2, which is a sinusoid with a frequency of only 3 Hz. Can you explain this? Okay, here it is. This is the waveform. And this is the cosine of 2 pi by the semi-difference. The period is 1/3 of a second. Yet, each 1/3 of a second has 2 beats. So the period of the beats is 1/6 of a second. That's it.
That's all, folks.